Sometimes the most powerful forces in the world can be stopped by the smallest voices. A single piece of paper, 7 simple words written in crayon, and one of the largest corporations on Earth forced to change everything. This is the story of how a child rewrote the rules of an entire industry without ever knowing the earthquake they had started. The year was 1997. The world was changing faster than anyone could have imagined. The internet was exploding into mainstream consciousness. Cell phones were becoming smaller. Companies were racing to dominate the new digital landscape. And in the middle of this revolution stood Microsoft, the giant, the unstoppable force. A company so dominant that governments were already investigating whether it had become too powerful. Bill Gates had built an empire that touched nearly every computer on the planet. Windows ran on over 90% of personal computers worldwide. The company was worth hundreds of billions of dollars, and they had just launched something that would cement their dominance forever. Or so they thought. Internet Explorer was Microsoft's weapon in the browser wars. They were giving it away for free, bundling it directly into Windows, making it impossible to avoid. Their competitor Netscape was scrambling to survive. The tech world was watching what many considered the most aggressive business strategy in corporate history. Microsoft was everywhere, in homes, in offices, in schools, especially in schools. That's where our story really begins, in classrooms across America where children were learning to navigate this strange new digital world on computers that all ran the same software. Computers that all had the same logo. Computers that all belonged to the same ecosystem, the Microsoft ecosystem. In a small elementary school classroom somewhere in the American heartland, a teacher had assigned a simple project. Write a letter to a company, any company. Tell them what you think about their product. It was meant to teach children about communication, about expressing opinions, about understanding that their voices could reach beyond the walls of their classroom. Most kids wrote to toy companies, to cereal manufacturers, to makers of video games. But one child chose differently. One child decided to write to Microsoft. And what they wrote was so simple, so innocent, so devastatingly honest that it would eventually reach the desk of Bill Gates himself. The letter contained 7 words that would echo through the halls of one of the most powerful corporations on Earth. I don't like Internet Explorer. That was it. No elaborate criticism, no technical complaints, just a child's pure, unfiltered opinion delivered with the brutal honesty that only children possess. The letter went into an envelope. The envelope went into the mail. And then something unexpected happened. It arrived. Not just at some general mailbox where it would be filtered by assistants and forgotten, but it made its way through the labyrinth of corporate hierarchy. Someone read it, then someone else, then someone else. Because in 1997, Microsoft was under intense scrutiny. The United States Department of Justice had opened an antitrust investigation. The company was being accused of monopolistic practices, of using their dominance in operating systems to crush competition in other markets. And here was this letter, this simple, honest letter from a child who just didn't like their product. But the letter represented something far bigger than one child's opinion. It was a mirror, a reflection of a truth that Microsoft had been avoiding. They had spent so much energy crushing their competition, dominating the market, and forcing their browser onto every computer that they had forgotten something fundamental. They had forgotten to make something people actually wanted to use. The child's letter became a symbol inside the company. Not officially, not in any press release or public statement, but internally, among the teams who were building the future of the internet, that letter started conversations. Uncomfortable conversations. Conversations about whether winning through force was the same as winning through excellence. Around the same time, the antitrust case was intensifying. The Department of Justice was building a case that would eventually lead to a landmark trial. They were arguing that Microsoft was illegally tying Internet Explorer to Windows, that they were using their monopoly in operating systems to destroy competition in the browser market. The evidence was damning. Internal emails showing executives discussing how to cut off Netscape's air supply. Contracts that forced computer manufacturers to promote Internet Explorer. Meetings where executives openly discussed eliminating competitors. The trial would begin in 1998 and would dominate headlines for years. Microsoft would eventually be found guilty of violating the Sherman Antitrust Act. The company would face the possibility of being broken up into smaller pieces. Their stock would tumble. Their reputation would be shattered. But something else was happening beneath the surface of these legal battles. The culture inside Microsoft was beginning to shift. Not because of the lawsuit alone, not because of government pressure or bad publicity, but because people inside the company were starting to ask themselves uncomfortable questions, questions sparked by symbols like that child's letter. If a kid who grew up with computers, who had no bias or agenda, who simply wanted to browse the internet, didn't like their product, what did that say? What did it mean when your victory came from forcing people to use your software rather than choosing it? What kind of company did they want to be? The legal battle would drag on for years. Microsoft would face penalties. They would be forced to change their business practices. They would have to open up their APIs to competitors. The European Union would launch their own investigations, leading to billions in fines. The company's image as an innovative leader would be replaced by a reputation as a ruthless monopolist. Bill Gates would eventually step down from day-to-day operations. The company would spend the next decade trying to rebuild trust and relevance in an industry that had moved on without them. Google would rise. Apple would reinvent itself. Facebook would dominate social media. And Microsoft, the once unstoppable giant, would be forced to completely reimagine what it meant to be a technology company. The full transformation would take nearly 20 years. Under new leadership, Microsoft would eventually embrace open-source software. They would make their tools available on competing platforms. They would acquire GitHub, the home of collaborative software development. They would invest in Linux, the open-source operating system they once called a cancer. They would build Visual Studio Code, a free code editor that developers actually chose to use because it was good, not because they were forced to. They would create a new browser, Microsoft Edge, built on Chromium, the same open-source engine that powers Google Chrome. They would focus on cloud services, developer tools, and accessibility. They would become, ironically, one of the most trusted companies in technology, a company that competed by being better rather than by being bigger. Could all of this be traced back to one child's letter? Of course not. History is never that simple. The antitrust case was already in motion. The industry was already changing. The internet was already evolving beyond anyone's control. But symbols matter. Small moments of truth matter. That letter represented a crack in the armor of corporate invincibility. It represented the voice of an actual user, untainted by market analysis or focus groups or strategic planning. It represented the simple question that every company should ask, but so few do. Are we making something people actually want, or are we just making something we can force people to use? The child who wrote that letter never knew what happened to it. They probably forgot about it the next day, moved on to other school projects, grew up in a world where Internet Explorer became irrelevant, replaced by Chrome and Firefox and Safari. A world where Microsoft was no longer the villain, but just another player in an infinitely more complex game. They never knew that their 7 words had traveled through one of the largest corporations on Earth, that those words had been discussed in meetings. that they had become part of a larger conversation about power and responsibility and what it means to truly serve your users. Today, the business world loves to talk about customer obsession, about user experience, about putting people first. Companies spend millions on research trying to understand what their customers really want. They run surveys and focus groups and analyze data points. But sometimes the truth is simpler than all of that. Sometimes it's just 7 words from a kid who was honest enough to say what everyone else was thinking. I don't like Internet Explorer. That honesty, that willingness to speak truth to power, even unknowingly, even innocently, carries more weight than any market research. Because at the end of the day, all the money and all the lawyers and all the market dominance in the world cannot change a simple fact. If people don't like what you're making, eventually you will fail. Eventually the market will move on. Eventually a new generation will choose something different, and all your power will mean nothing. The butterfly effect suggests that small changes can have enormous consequences. A butterfly flaps its wings in Brazil and causes a tornado in Texas. A child writes 7 words in crayon and contributes to the transformation of one of the most powerful companies in human history. We will never know all the factors that led to Microsoft's evolution. We will never be able to draw a straight line from that letter to every decision that followed. But we know this. In a moment when Microsoft was at its most powerful and most dangerous, when it seemed untouchable and inevitable, a small voice spoke truth. And somewhere in the machinery of that vast corporation, someone listened. Someone thought. Someone began to question. And questions lead to conversations. And conversations lead to changes. And changes, given enough time, can transform everything. The next time you think your voice doesn't matter, remember this story. Remember that the most powerful forces in the world are still made up of people. People who can read. People who can think. People who can be moved by simple truths. You don't need to be an expert. You don't need to have all the answers. Sometimes you just need to be honest enough to say what you really think. Because somewhere, someone might be listening. Someone might be ready to hear what you have to say. And that small moment of truth might be exactly what the world needs to begin changing direction. 7 words, 1 letter, an entire industry transformed. That's the real butterfly effect. That's how the future is made. Not always by the powerful. Not always by the loud. But sometimes by the small, honest voices that dare to speak truth when everyone else stays silent. If this story made you think differently about the power of honesty and the importance of every voice, hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel for more stories about the small moments that changed everything. Because history isn't just made by kings and presidents and billionaires. Sometimes it's made by children with crayons who simply tell the truth. And those truths echo longer than anyone could imagine.